So welcome, everyone, and thank you for braving the heat this evening. We're really delighted to have Rab and Denise Bennetts with us tonight. They will be lecturing on their work with surprising connections to Rome, so I shall be brief. Bennetts Associates is one of Britain's most respected practices, and this is their first public lecture in Italy. They're also friends and supporters of the BSR's architecture programme. It's also my personal pleasure to have them with us. The Bennetts have designed a number of theatres, and the Hampstead Theatre, that I think might be presented later on in the talk. Well, you might see images of. It's anyway my favourite, one of my favourite London venues, and not only as a theatre, and I think this is typical of a lot of your work, but also as a very intimate public space to spend time in and to meet people in. Lucia and Nucci will be introducing their work in 1 minute. Lucia is an old friend of the BSR and a specialist in British architecture and public space in particular. She's Professor of Urbanism at Roma Tre University, where among many other roles she coordinates the Erasmus programme. Lucia is the author of 2 books on London's open spaces, Verde di prossimità e disegno urbano, and Reti Verdi e disegno della città contemporanea, both published by Gangemi. So let's welcome first Lucia and then Rab and Denise.
I would like to thank the British School to organize this, to invite Denise and Rab Bennett to give the first Italian lecture here in Rome. Denise and Rab Bennett co-founded the firm BENNETTS Associates in 1987 and try to introduce the firm. I think they perfectly represent the role of an architect in our contemporary city and contemporary society. If you look at the website, in the website there are a long list of hours, 26 RIBA hours. 3 times they was in the list of Stirling Prize, and it's an intense and long list of prizes. And all this mention was for quality in their project. So I've tried to better understand what does mean, and I prepared a short list that I hope I have well interpreted what is it, yes, what does mean to be a good architect now. So in the firm they use a rational method to design that is not obvious. They verify, they do an hypothesis and then they verify the hypothesis and they evaluating and change this hypothesis. So it's an important things that we have to remember. Secondly, they combine research and innovation, and it seems that the projects are a synthesis of this gym, let's say, intellectual gym in their work. They have a perfect control of the different scale. If you look at the website, you have a great variety of projects, from a very small scale project as could be the Old Vic famous theatre in Southwark, to big project as the master plan and the work they have done for Crossrail, the major infrastructure that connects East and West London. So seems rare to have a firm that could control at the same time the different scale. They mix different technique in their work. They use hand drawing, but also maquette and beam and the most advanced technical things, but talking with him, they confirm that the end draw it's an important bit of the work, of their work. Another interesting aspect seems that they, when they receive someone involved the firm in a project, they immediately involve the client in the work, but not only in the work as the project, but in the process of doing this work. It's important because in my experience, it's very interesting in the planning game, the dialogue between the architect and the municipality, the client, and to have a firm that dedicate time to this, it seems very important. And finally, they are very attentive to the cost saving and the waste reduction. That of course, is an important topic now. I stop here because I think it's more important to listen to the lecture.
Right. I took this picture about 3 years ago when I last came to Rome, and it was partly to come here, but also it was a trip which was a celebration of completing a job in London, and the client said he wanted to take the whole team away for a weekend somewhere, and he chose Rome, which was a fantastic thing to do. So I came to look at the Eric Parry exhibition when it was here, so it was great. So that was what it was about.
Would you like an introduction?
Introduction?
Introduction. I'd just like to say that we had a choice for tonight. We've been celebrating the 30th anniversary of the practice. And as Julia said, we have a very, very broad, wide-ranging portfolio. But we decided for tonight that it would be more appropriate to not do breadth but lack of depth. So that's why we have actually chosen to focus primarily on 3 projects, which we think have a resonance with what we have learnt from Rome or something even more tangible from Rome. But clearly we've shown some of our other work in passing, and it would be very good afterwards if there's time, either in question and answer or just in conversation, just to pick up on some of the themes that Julia alluded to. But we thought within the lecture, let's just keep it narrow and deeper rather than wider.
So we thought nevertheless we should start with some influences on us, and we met in Edinburgh. We both grew up in the city. We were training as architecture students there, and you could not help but to see that this was a city of incredible distinction. And although this map is from about the end of the 18th century, but it's nevertheless, it's still very like this now. And you have the old medieval city here, which it started about 1100. It had a fortress on the rock, which is an old volcano in the middle of town. It had a 1 mile long street leading to the royal palace and steep slopes on both sides, so the town could not expand. It was a very dirty and dense town by the end of the 1700s, and so they had a competition for a new town in 1767, and this is it. It was won by a 26-year-old architect called James Craig. 26, he won the competition. And it's a little bit straight, but it's on the crest of the next hill, with a square at each end, and lots of simple streets, but a one-sided street facing the castle, and a one-sided street facing the north, which is onto the River Forth and the country in the distance. It's a spectacularly interesting town. But then there was another new town, another new town, and another new town, which expanded after that, and even more down here. So by the time the 20th century came along, it was a fully developed city, but this is exactly like it is still today. There's a railway in the middle, but most of it is exactly like you see. So it's a very well-preserved historic street, series of historic spaces. And I guess that was a big influence on us as we started drawing. So the first drawing I thought I'd show you, this is the view from the studio where we studied architecture. The most fantastic thing to see Edinburgh Castle, and this is before we had a camera, so we were drawing all the time. And we did townscape projects in Edinburgh, so you have the skyline of the old town looked at from the new town of 1767, but obviously drawn when we were students. So the first drawing, I guess we were 18, 19, something like this, and this was when we were about 20, and we were doing a townscape project with a little gate we found, and beautiful changing levels in Edinburgh which go up and down the hill. It's a fantastic place. And at the end of our first year, we separately went to Italy, and after second year we started going together. So this was obviously a drawing of Florence, done in 1972, and of course what it shows is a relationship of a major building with the streets which were around it. This is, it wasn't titled at the time, but I think it's Urbino, and it's a street obviously climbing up the hill. And what we were finding is we were excited by the ordinary streets, if you like, the dense urban clusters. And these are much later drawings. This is about 10 years ago in Siena. And this one was a couple of years ago in Verona. And I think the lesson we were drawing from these examples is that we were more interested in the street and buildings as a backdrop to city life, rather than set-piece, major, expensive public buildings. That was obviously helpful, and you need some sometimes in any city. But I think the way streets work and the way cities work was fundamental. And when we were leaving college, there was a book published called Collage City, which many of you will know, I'm sure. So 1978, we left college in 77, and it drew the distinction between the type of town planning which is coming out of modernism. This happens to be Corbusier about 1922, but it's the sort of plan that is still happening in Beijing or somewhere like that. It's still prevalent. And we were much more interested in this kind of thing. It seemed to us we would rather live here. And it has opportunities for fine buildings, it has opportunities for modern buildings or old buildings in a city which can take all of those things in a diverse way. So that's a kind of pointer to our attitudes. And we were interested in the city as a backdrop for city life, rather than just architecture showing off all the time. So, the first project we thought we'd show you is an office building. It's just an ordinary office building. But we do lots of office buildings, and we quite like them because there's a discipline with doing commercial buildings. You can't spend too much, it must be a good shape, it must work for the commercial market and so on. But it's in part of the City of London. Now, the City of London is really the financial district. West City of Westminster is where the Parliament is and so on. Lots of small towns and cities make up the whole of London. This one is the City of London. And to the west of the financial district is this area, which is like where the lawyers are. And they have lawyers, colleges and chambers and courtyards and trees and lawns and so on. And sometimes you'll find one in here, and we wanted to create one in this street too. So we said, let's not cover the whole site with a building, which would be normal, with an atrium in the middle like a corporate office building. Let's create another courtyard with a route through from the street directly opposite the gate to another courtyard on the other side. And we wrapped the space right around the perimeter, following the edges of the street, which is a strange angle, not always a right angle. And then at the back, we incorporated a historic building, which is from the time of Dickens, because he had a friend who lived in the same street, and he wrote about those buildings in his books, so we kept it. So it's an interesting building, but it's most important to see the plans at a greater level. This is the ground floor with the main entrance, the route to the courtyard, some simple office space on the ground floor, and then these old buildings retained at the back. But the main thing about offices, as I said, is the discipline. We have to somehow reconcile straight commercial buildings, which are worth a huge amount of money in London, with the demands of architecture and urban design and the street. So here we have simple rectangles to make up the commercial space. And there's a lot of planning goes into all of these. They make the angle turn the corner with the stairs and lifts and so on, and they would dovetail into the rear of the site with a small top-lit space to make the gap between the new building and the old building. And to give you an idea, this is the kind of thing that goes on inside office buildings, which I'm sure you all know. But this is for lawyers. Lots and lots of simple offices, 3 meters apart, must be 3 meters apart, must be 6 meters deep. We must have a circulation here, it must have a certain density, it must have a certain cost. So we're working with a highly disciplined, very demanding commercial environment to make something good for the city. So we try to reflect that in the facades. And on the main street, which is called Chancery Lane, we have a larger scale to reflect its importance. On the side street, we have a smaller scale and it drops in height from 7 stories to 6 stories, and round the corner goes to 5 and then 4. On the main street, you never really see this view because you look up the street and down the street, never straight ahead. But the main element in the entrance is the courtyard, not the front door to the building, which is not obvious when you're there, but you go into the courtyard first rather than choose to enter the office building. And the scale of the building is different on this street, as I said, to the side street. But then we built it. Now this is where the surprising connection to Rome comes in, because we have this wonderful Roman travertine on the facade of the building, which comes from just down the road here. And what we are trying to do here is clad the building in a way that completely faithfully respects the structure inside. So this isn't just facadism, it's not just a veneer, it reflects the structure reflects the space inside reflects its energy consumption, its use, and so on. So I wanted to take you through a little journey about how we made this facade. So here we are in Tivoli, not so far away, and we discovered that there were different choices of stone. One of them could have been a North European stone, a British stone called Purbeck, another one, or Portland stone. Another one could have been travertine. And the thing we were thinking of with travertine is it can sometimes be a little bit too uniform. But we discovered in this quarry, there's an amazing single quarry which has a grey stripe right through the travertine. It's quite extraordinary. And if you look at the blocks which come out of it, it's called oniciato, I think it's called. You get this amazing swirl in the travertine, which I've not seen anywhere else. Now this is Alison, our job architect, and she saw the job right through from beginning to end, had a baby at the end of the job. Perfect timing. So she's now been back at work and had another baby. She's off at work at the moment. So she's selecting the travertine in the quarry. And then we selected slabs from the travertine, which were extraordinary. I mean, this colour is fantastic. There's a little bit here which is in a sample quite difficult because it's got a big crack in it, and if the frost and the ice got into it in winter, it might not help the stone. So we were putting a circle around it saying, let's maybe not have stones like this because it's too much. So we then did a mock-up in the computer. This is a drawing, not a real thing. So we have the glass of the window, we have the ventilator beside, we have a thick piece on the corner, which I'll explain in a minute, and we try to represent the stone as realistically as we can to show what it's like. And in between each stone panel is a concrete horizontal member with a drip to make the water come off the edge so it doesn't streak down the building with the pollution of the London streets. Now the thing, if you clad buildings with stone, which we sometimes do, it's always very unsatisfactory, I think, to see the thin edge of the veneer on the edge of the stone, maybe only 25 millimeters or 40 millimeters thick. So we wanted to make it have a greater substance. So this piece on the corner is 120 millimeters thick, and it goes right the way through, and you can see it's solid stone because the vein goes right around the corner. So it has the feeling of real quality about it, a little bit like the older buildings here, which are built of travertine too, of course, but there's a concrete structure behind with insulation in the gap. Then we built a real mock-up, partly in our courtyard in the office and partly in the yard with the precast guy. And then we had Campolonghi from Pisa. I don't know if it's a company you know, but they're easily the best of the Italian stone manufacturers, we think. They took the travertine blocks, cut it into slabs in Pisa, laid it out in their workshops, and we could then arrange the slabs in different compositions to make sure that we got a good balance of the crazy stone with the vein in it and the plainer stone in different parts of the panel. So an enormous amount of care was taken in getting this right. And Alison went through this yard about 11 or 12 times in the period of 2 years to select the stone and get the guys to move it from one place to another. But of course the result is, I think, pretty good for the street. This is the street taken looking south. And you see the older buildings are all masonry. The windows are very deeply set, like most historic cities. So you don't see the windows, you don't see too much glass. So we have this pattern going up the street, and here we are with our building. Now this facade is 0.5 meter thick, and most developers, most property companies would say, can you make it as thin as possible, please? Because it maximizes the commercial value of the space inside. And we said, no, we want to give it some substance. So we made it as thick as we could. You can see the travertine from every angle and not much glass. And it's absolutely not a modern glass office block. And if you go to the outside of most cities, we went to Milan a little while ago, it's all glass office blocks. So is London, so is Frankfurt, so is Beijing, so are most cities around the world. Why do we do the same kind of building all over the world? We're trying to make it a bit more contextual. Looking down the side street, it has a different scale, much tighter grain, much finer detail. Looking along the main street, here's a piece by the front door, and right on the corner we have that difficult piece of how do you turn the corner. So like any building, you go around with an angle on the 45 degrees with travertine either side and precast concrete taking the corner, and then the concrete runs down the length of the street. This is just a detail to show the richness of the stone, but it also shows, because the windows are recessed, it shades the glass. You don't need extra sun shading because the glass is also high performance, so the building is not fully air conditioned. You could open the windows, you have a little bit of cooling, so in terms of sustainability, it's really quite good. And a couple more details to show what the building's like. Now, if you go through this courtyard entrance, there are two tall walls on either side. One is glass, one is travertine. And we worked with an artist called Susanna Heron, who is we've worked with her 2 or 3 times, and she has made these beautiful panels, 2 stories high, with her inspiration being the birch trees in the courtyard. And the birch trees are very, very straight, but not completely straight, and you get a little bit of an overlap between the stems, and she's taken inspiration from that to do these incised shapes in the wall. I'll come back to that in just a minute. If you go into the reception area in the courtyard, it's pretty obvious that it's a nice environment. This was done for an advertising agency called Saatchi & Saatchi. And then looking back in the courtyard, here are the birch trees looking towards the street. That's when the gate is shut at the end, which is basically after 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. And you can see these amazing pieces of travertine. It's thicker here, it's about 125 millimeters thick in the wall. And you can see it from inside the main reception to the street. And that's the detail. So you get the sense of fine grain cut by computer-controlled machines to show these tiny little differences, 2 millimeters, 4 millimeters, 8 millimeters between each piece. And this is a photograph of a piece about that size. So it's very rich in the detail. And it almost has the quality of curtains with the vein running through the stone. So that's the first project with a little bit of a surprising connection to Rome.
Yes. I was going to say, the first time we worked with Susanna, we had to set up an enclosure on the building site because she ended up carving slate in situ, and it was winter time. So there was lots of protection, there was temporary heating and such like. The next piece we did, she actually carved 6 very, very large, 3 metre wide, 5 metre high panels in her studio, but they were laid flat, so that was pretty back-breaking. But now it's actually, she does all the drawings in incredible detail, and it's then translated into a computer program, and the computer cuts the stone. So it's an intriguing difference, that it used to be that she was chipping away at a surface, and now she has the wherewithal to actually deal with it in a much greater 3-dimensional way, which is quite interesting. So the second project we're going to talk about is now called Storyhouse, Chester. It was simply the Chester Cultural District when we started, and the tenuous link to Rome is that Chester was originally a Roman settlement. And what we can see here are the lines of the walls and the 2 principal thoroughfares coming through north-south and east-west. And the red rectangle towards the top is our site. This is looking a little bit closer. On the right-hand side, we have the current town plan with the Roman fort overlaid, more detail over there on the left. The actual urban context is slightly more complicated than that red line diagram. The north-south route wasn't actually continuous. It kind of jinked when it came to the Forum, and the Forum has ended up still as the principal public space in the city 2,000 years later, although now it's flanked by the town hall and the cathedral. And you can see it here, that the wider...
Pointer's in the middle. That's it.
Yeah, the wider part here was the end of the Forum, and then we have the cathedral and the town hall. The city suffered. It was like so many Northern European cities, it suffered post-war dereliction, lack of confidence, etc. So it ended up with quite a lot of areas which were left empty. So this is actually a bus station, which is basically just on the surface. And this was our site here. It's a very, very long site, as you can see, and it's just to the south of one of the gates into the city. Oops, sorry, too quick. What we were faced with when we started the project was that our client was actually the local authority. The local authority wanted to breathe new cultural life into the city because they realised that cities don't just need workplace, they don't just need retail or whatever, but they actually have a way of bringing people together, and culture and the arts is very, very important. What they had was actually an Odeon Cinema. I'm sure you have many 1930s cinemas in Italy. The Odeon was one of the great cinema groups in the UK, and they built fantastic Art Deco cinemas in the 1930s. This is actually a listed building, a grade 2 listed building, not the highest grade, but not only historically important, but actually really important emotionally to the city. So many grandparents would talk about going on their early dates there and tell their grandchildren about it. But it had been empty for 10 years. It had been converted to a multiplex, but the multiplex didn't work. It had been phenomenal in its heyday, when it was really popular. Fabulous Art Deco interior, lovely foyer spaces. Might not be our taste, but they were very, very important for the period. And so they really needed to know what to do with this building and how to breathe life in. So they said, what we would like is you to come up with a building which reinvigorates a one-screen cinema. We'd actually like to move the library out of the town hall building. By the way, could you also just put in a theatre? And luckily, to the rear of the building was this rather ordinary office building, and the local authority said, this building is redundant, it's not very good, we'll be happy to demolish it. And that means you can break through from the old cinema, through what was the screen, into this area behind. The added advantage of taking this building down was it had a basement, which meant they had already lost the Roman archaeology in that area. If we were trying to do it now, we would have run into difficulty. So we came up with what is a very, very simple concept. We have the brick box of the Odeon, which we strip out, and we have a brick box, which is a theatre with the necessary fly tower, so visiting productions can come in. And then we put a glass box inside the brick box for the cinema, and we wrap the brick box in glass. So you get a nice kind of companionship and a bit of a balance. And then we put a studio theatre on top of the new theatre. And so we see it now in slightly more detail at the first floor level. So we have the original tower of the Odeon here. We have various rooms which can be used for library functions, the foyer spaces which come in to the cinema. And the cinema then has a route that can come down to break through the proscenium arch where the screen was to access the new build theatre behind. Our client, Julia talked about working close with the client. Our client said, you cannot be, you're crazy. You're saying you're going to put a cinema inside a library, which is exactly what we have done, and that you're actually then going to fill the proscenium space with staircases and such like. And not only that, you're going to make them a major feature of the building. And we said, trust us. Luckily they did. So we have the section. So again, reading from the right, we have the smaller spaces which can be used for children's library, etc., coming through the foyers into the cinema. The cinema is at first floor level, so actually it can project onto a temporary screen, and all of the ground floor area is cafe, bar, and more library space, book spaces. And then you break through the proscenium, and you get a very, very active volume, vertical volume, with all the vertical circulation and links into it. And then you come through into the theatre. I'll come back to the theatre later on, because it's got the fly tower, it's got 3 levels. This is really for visiting shows coming in during the year, and then it's got a studio up on top. And we were talking about representation. This is a computer visualization, and it absolutely captures what we were trying to achieve with the building. It was also captured in the rain, because it rains an awful lot in the northwest of England. So rather than showing it with fake sunshine, this is very realistic. But it absolutely shows the fact that we hoped to actually improve the proportions of the building by balancing the original brick box with the brick box wrapped in the glass. And a bit like Chancery Lane, you know, this is an unreal view long term. Currently, you can see this image because the area over the road in the bus station hasn't been developed. It will. This is actually going to become a street, so it won't be quite so open. But we do have the opportunity of actually opening up more entrances. The original entrance, another entrance into the cafe, bar, library, and then entrance in for the theatre as well. And somewhere along the line, it became Storyhouse, the place where people come together. They read books, they go to the theatre, and they actually go to the cinema. They're all different ways of actually engaging with culture, and it's from young children to much older people. As I say, this you can see there's a bit of a street there. This view will eventually be part of the street. And not quite so open, but you see the translucency, the transparency. We actually have the get-in for the theatre tucked away at the back. It's a very, very, very tight site, but it actually, this was one of those beautiful summer days that we do sometimes get in England. So, it's looking straight on. We were lucky that when we did start stripping out the building, we ended up finding that a lot of the original Art Deco plasterwork was still there. It hadn't been hacked off, but you can see that this is where the screen would have been. And this was actually our big opening through to what would be the theatre volumes beyond. And this is the section looking through at the different use of the cinema space, coming through, people using it in different ways, different types of day. And then when it was complete, we actually had the original Art Deco interiors were refurbished to actually match the original glory. And there's just books absolutely everywhere. This is the small cinema. It seats about 70, but it's been used for seminars, conferences. People sit on the steps and things. And this is underneath the cinema. So this is the translucent glass enclosure to the cinema. And here we have the cafe and the bar underneath. During the day, it's a cafe, people come, but literally they just pick up books and sit down. And this building has actually had about 1 million visitors in the first year since it was finished. And the number of people who have joined the library has gone up. There is no security. It's open from 8 a.m. in the morning until the final performance closes. And people can come in and they just literally pick up a book. If they decide they like it, they can then take it out and take it on loan. And then we've got the children's library. It's got much more intimate spaces used for storytelling and such like. And then we begin to really play up the blood red circulation, as the artistic director refers to it. So we do have very animated circulation routes between the spaces, which help to inhabit the proscenium arch. So what used to be the projection area with people's stories being told, actually the scene now is the people of Chester provide the narrative for what's going on. Looking back. This one was for Marina. This was 3 weeks ago. The Queen officially opened Storyhouse, as you can just see that there. and it was the first official visit by Meghan Markle. So that, as the Queen always wears very bright clothes, so she, red and green should never be seen, but I think it does actually work in that particular instance. I said I'd come back to the theatre. Marina referenced Hampstead Theatre in London, the first theatre we did. We won it because we'd never done a theatre before. It's a trick you can only pull off once, but having built one, we've actually now got a reputation for theatres. And this one is intriguing. The client wanted the theatre to function in two different modes. This is a regular 750-seat theatre with stalls and then two upper circle and balcony levels, a regular proscenium arch, fly tower. It can have a thrust stage if need be, but they also wanted to adapt it. So that in summertime, when they put on their own festival, the festival they used to have to hold in a tent because the old theatre had been closed, they actually give up the stalls, raise the stage level, and we have a 500-seat capacity theatre with a thrust stage. We referenced economy earlier. This takes a week to put up. They use scaffolding to change it. It's not funny hydraulics with lots of gizmos. It is just basically people coming in and reconfiguring the auditorium. And as you can see, the infrastructure, the structural infrastructure is quite considerable for a theatre building with all the rakes and sight lines and everything else. And that's looking from the stage in the full three-tier mode. And you can understand when you look at all the kit that they are used to playing about with, that actually changing and reconfiguring is actually just in a day's work for theatre people. So this is when it opened in the summer mode with the thrust stage, and looking out from the stage, and looking across the stage. And then we moved back to London.
So it's interesting just to reflect on the theatre volume. There's only 500 seats, and I'll show you a picture in a minute of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, which was 1,050 seats, but both of them trying to achieve a similar kind of intimacy. Now, those are two buildings that we spent a little bit of time on, just to make sure we're okay for time this time. I thought I'd do a few buildings that we've done in other completely different respects. This, you may know, if you know London, you will probably know the King's Cross area of London. We've got St Pancras Station, where the Eurostar train comes in from Paris. King's Cross Station is alongside it. And for many years it was a derelict area in the middle of London, very valuable but terribly polluted and with many landowners, so it was impossible to unlock it. Well, finally that's happened, and it's now nearing completion, and we've done 4 buildings on King's Cross development, the ones in colour. This is an office building for the local council. This is an office and supermarket, believe it or not, with a gallery in it. This one is a sports hall, and this is a very large building for a very big IT company, initial beginning with F. I'm not supposed to tell you, but it's, they're just about to start construction with that one. Anyway, this one, just to give you an idea of the scale of it, this is the building for the local council. So it has 10 stories of offices above a deck, and underneath the deck, which is up here, we have a library, we have a cafe, we have council services, and below this level we have a swimming pool and a gym and all kinds of other functions. So the structure is incredibly complex, and we hang these lower floors in the middle from the big structure to make sure the columns don't end up in the middle of the swimming pool. So it's quite a complicated building, but it turned out very well. It was very sustainable. It got the highest sustainability rating of any large building in the UK, and then recently Bloomberg, the Foster building, got a slightly higher rating. So it's right at the edge. It's really very
this was
simple.
Considerably more economic than Bloomberg.
About a quarter of a minute. If you take the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, I'm just going to show you several projects in a run now. Here's another incredibly complex building. It's right beside the river, which always floods, the River Avon, and it had again, like Chester, had a 1930s building at the base of it. So this is the fly tower. These are the walls of the original 1930s theatre, but it was designed like a cinema. So as you got further away from the stage, it was like a fan shape, and the audience was farther and farther away and more dissatisfied with seeing the play 35 or 40 meters away. It was a very long distance from the back row to the stage. So our instruction when we won a competition was to put in a new, much more intimate theatre where nobody was far from the stage, And the director said, can you make it an auditorium that Shakespeare would recognize? Now that's a really difficult thing to do in modern architectural terms, but we built it out of column and beam. So it's basically columns and beams around the edge in steel. It has a thrust stage going into the middle of the room. It has an audience on 3 sides, as densely packed as we can possibly make it, and it has these 3 levels. So I've stood on the stage myself. When you're out there, it feels like there's a wall of faces right up in front of you, and nobody is beyond touching distance. And when it was first opened, the atmosphere was electric, and you find people at the front really feel part of the play. It's called a one-room theatre, instead of the audience over here, the play on the stage, a 2-room theatre. So this is a one-room theatre. And there was somebody on the front row who was really upset at a murder that was going on, and she jumped up and said, "Stop it," in the middle of the show. And they said, "No, don't worry, it's not real." So it's a fantastic place. It's a really exhilarating thing to see Shakespeare played properly in a really good theatre that's designed for it. That's what it's like from the outside. It has a park on the one side, the river on the other. This is what it's like from the town, which is a medieval town from 14th century and earlier. So you have a Victorian old building over here, the 1930s building still there, and a new viewing tower at the edge of the street. So you go up to the top and you see the 4 counties that Shakespeare wrote about. You can see his house, you can see the school, you see the church where he's buried. You work your way down and then get a ticket for the play. Another cultural project we're just beginning now in London is at a place called Woolwich Arsenal. Now, you will know the Arsenal Alley at Venice. It's exactly the same. It was for the manufacture of weapons and ammunition, and it was operational until the 1960s. And eventually the buildings fell into disrepair. The land was sold off, but there are 5 buildings in the middle which are still there, still empty. 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and we are converting all of them into a place called the Woolwich Cultural Creative District. So in this one there's going to be a dance school, in this one there's going to be a concert hall, up to 1,100 people, dance studios, artist studios, and Assemble might be coming in here, by the way. I know they're coming here soon. We're hoping they're going to occupy this space, and some backup house. Then there's going to be a museum, a new theatre underneath a big flexible roof, and some more studios. And then this one, a theatre group is going to take this whole building and do their own show inside. So we're just starting to do this now. The planning application is going in. And just to give you a feeling for what it's like, this is the concert hall. So it's a most unusual place to put a concert because it has lots of columns. It would be impossible for dance, but it's okay for music. We tried a full-size orchestra in here playing Beethoven's Sixth, and the acoustic was fantastic. So the fact that there are columns doesn't seem to affect the position of the orchestra or the enjoyment of the audience, and the acoustics are absolutely great. And then you come out of that hall and we're building a new lobby onto the courtyard, so the courtyard will become another performance space or a market or something different completely. So the local council, again, is the client for this. They could spend money on housing projects, which are really tricky at the moment. They decided to spend some money on culture and make sure the whole place comes up, which is great. Now this is back to Edinburgh, and we're going to finish in Edinburgh. So do you want to talk about the first Edinburgh project?
Yes, yes. This is going back to Edinburgh in the 1960s. This particular area was bottom right in the very early plans that we showed. George Square. Whoops. Sorry. Whoops.
Back a bit.
Yeah. George Square down here is the heart of Edinburgh University as it is now. The original university is slightly off the screen, but this was the major 1960s development. They built a couple of tower buildings here and just out of sight down here. And I can remember going to school when this was all developed with old tenement buildings, the traditional Edinburgh type buildings, and this was all demolished. And there were going to be, going back to Collage City, there were going to be 3 object buildings coming down here. They built the first one up at the top here, up to the north, and it was so unpopular that they decided to not carry on and develop the other 2 buildings. But inevitably, that meant they did nothing. So the site was left empty. It was a rather rough surface car park for many years. And then in 2003, there was a competition. And they wanted to put some of the high-end computing department from the university into the development. And we came along and luckily won it. So this is the tall tower building that you saw in the earlier image. And we haven't talked too much about briefing and building use, etc. But this is one of those things where it's very much, there's an overlap between how universities want their space to be and what contemporary workspace is like. There's an awful lot of crossover. So this is very much a case of taking office space. They wanted a lot of cellularization and really just wrapping it around the site, wrapping it in on itself, creating volumes, creating courtyards, creating, the building is called the Informatics Forum, and they wanted the place for people to meet as well as be separate. And there is also a pedestrian route that comes through to reinstate what had been there originally. This is looking down the street, and again, we showed you Chancery Lane. Chancery Lane, early days, was actually concurrent with this project. It took a long time to build. So you can see the similar notions of looking at how does one interpret an inner city, in this instance, a Georgian inner city area, with terms of the ratios and proportions and of the buildings, and how do you actually just articulate different heights, etc. They wanted a lot of cellularization, but they also wanted a lot of places for people to meet. They wanted places for serendipity. And serendipity is where you expect chance encounters to happen. But what we have to do is actually come up and fabricate the opportunities. We have to give people the opportunity to bump into each other. And so there's a lot of mini fora, as they call it. This is a two-story one. We also have what the client called the wormhole staircases. So that if you're on one level and you look across and you see somebody and you want to quickly get down, you can literally just dash down, come in at either level and go around and find somebody. And of course, it is in Edinburgh, absolutely stunning city. So the views out are absolutely fantastic. And this isn't just to show you your view, but this is because academia in the UK is run on a budget. And they are trying to attract the world's best academics who could go to the Far East, they could go to America, and they could get paid considerably higher salaries. And so what they wanted were actually quite a lot of beautiful corner rooms with stunning views, where they could say to people, okay, you don't get a great salary, you get a great view, and you get phenomenal students to work with. Yeah. And that's another of the views, which takes us on to the final building.
And the last project is also in Edinburgh. This is Edinburgh Castle, of course. And the college where we trained is just off to the left. And the building here in the foreground, which is about 200 metres from the previous project, this is the old Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh, which was designed in 1875 by a guy called David Bryce. It was a top-grade listed building, and it was designed on the principles of hospital design developed with a famous nurse called Florence Nightingale. I don't know if you've heard of her in Italy, but it was an interesting hospital. But it was abandoned by the National Health Service in 2003, and it was just left empty ever since. But as you can see, it's got the most extraordinary historical style about it. Now, I have to say, this takes some liking. If this is a romantic's interpretation of Scottishness. So you go to the countryside of Scotland and you do see castles like this, but you also see hundreds of buildings like this throughout Edinburgh in the style of romantic Scottish castles. And so this is really a Scottish castle, except that it's a hospital, right in the middle of the city looking out at the castle. So the location is here. The castle is off to the right-hand side. This is the full extent of the hospital. It's a huge thing. And Foster and Partners did a master plan a number of years ago for the whole site and have done some new buildings in the middle, some new residential buildings, and they've taken, with another architect, the old wards which face south to the park and to the sun, they've converted them into residential. So there's offices, hotel, residential. It's a mixed-use development. But what it was missing was a sense of a complete society. So this building, which they hoped to convert into more flats or a hotel, they sold to the university. So the university are now taking this building, which is the oldest part, that's the old Royal Infirmary, is now going to be converted into something called the Edinburgh Futures Institute, which is going to be politics, business, art and design, a debate about society, IT, all kinds of multidisciplinary things in a single building like this. But as you can see, it has 6 wings made of hospital wards, each of which is 4 stories. So 24 hospital wards, all detached from each other by a very long corridor with this castle-like tower in the middle. So it could not be a less suitable building for integrated teaching of multidisciplinary types, because you need to meet, you need to have serendipity, you need to be sharing spaces. So our job was to try to convert this building into something suitable for education. Now we're just about to start construction, which you'll see. But the particular point I wanted to show you is how do you make a colour theme through the building work that is making it identifiable. Now, this is what it was like in the days of the early 20th century, just about the time of the First World War. So you can see very tall windows, lots of opening hoppers at the top, good natural ventilation and heating, a piano in the middle of the hospital ward, which must have been fantastic. And then when we found it, it was looking like this. It was like they put in ceilings for air conditioning, operating equipment in all corners like this. It was an absolute mess. There was water coming in. And so you have an end staircase like this, which is now rotten underneath. There's lots of water. And so we start demolishing the pieces which are not original, the bits which have been added in the 20th century. We're taking them away, so we see the original hospital underneath, but we also have dry rot, wet rot, asbestos, everything else you can think to deal with as well. And we're starting to develop an idea. So the idea is that we restore the original building into workspace for the university, teaching spaces and mixing spaces, and we clear out the front square in front of the building, which at the moment is blocked by an existing building. That's gone now. And you can walk up to the main entrance, which was a huge flight of steps, which is completely not acceptable nowadays. We have a ramp going all the way on both sides, a new square for performance, and a big event space underneath, and another square which can be used for the Edinburgh Festival in front of it.
Light boxes.
Now down the side of this big event space, we have these 2 glass structures, and they bounce light underneath into the space below. And I'll show you a picture of that in just a moment. So if you have a square on the street, which is new, it's not a very nice street, so this should completely transform the street. You go up to the main entrance in the Scottish Castle, and you go into the corridor. And so we've got the board on the right-hand side. We're having to restore and repair bits of structure. We've revealed the stone flagstones of the floor, which are covered up with vinyl at the moment. And then we're adding elements of fit-out. We're taking away the plaster and the timber lath to reveal the stonework behind that. And we're now beginning to turn our attention to things like colour. And we think with 6 wings to the building, 24 wards, we need an idea which somehow gives us a colour theme. So we're doing some studies at the moment about what the colours should be. How do you know where you are in the building? What should it be when you're looking through? Should it be the same colour everywhere? It's too much the same colour. If you go into the wings, which are new, you can see the old walls inside, so that's pretty clear. And if you go down to the event space underneath, we're now thinking here's the glass box which reflects light into the bottom, and we're trying out different colours here. And it occurred to us that maybe we're missing something here. So when we were on holiday a month ago in Siena, we went to see this painting, which most of you will know, I'm sure. But there's this wonderful series of frescoes on 3 sides of a room called Good and Bad Government. Bad government is on the left, the government is taking place in the centre, and on the right-hand side, which is this one, is the effects of good government. So you have a prosperous city. It's clearly meant to be somewhere like Siena. You see Siena Duomo in the top left-hand side. Then you have the city wall, and on the outside you have the countryside. And it's all very happy and prosperous. There are people doing business, getting corn from the fields. There's a wedding going on in the city and so on. And it seemed to us that we were already trying an idea of colours between the green and yellow spectrum at one end of the building and the more umber and red spectrum on the other end of the building. And it occurred to us that there's a metaphor here in the Edinburgh Futures Institute for good government. And so I tried this idea out on some of the Edinburgh professors, and they were really thrilled with it because they were thinking that this is an institute which hasn't had anything like it before. They've never done Futures Institute before. So you look back to 1350 and you find paintings of good government, and that's a kind of metaphor for the building. So we're now looking at taking some of these colours and trying to find the identity through the building from one end to the other. And if you just take a larger piece of it, of course, the colours are many and various, and so it won't be difficult to find the colour. It's just a nice theme to find our way back to Italy and to find one of the first representations of good government giving us a clue as to how to make this building work in the 21st century. Now that's pretty much all we were going to talk about. We've just about run out of time, and I thought the surprising connections to Rome were the first two projects. It had occurred to us when we were putting the slides together, we had a lot of connections to Italy, because we love the place. We've been here many, many times, and of course the most recent trip to Siena gave us another idea too. So we need to talk a little bit about how big we are, how we work, and so on. So maybe we do that with questions instead of carrying on. It's just gone 25 to 8, so it's probably time to stop.
Edinburgh characteristic in contemporary school of architecture. So the combination between architecture, art, and drawing. This is the first part of the question. The second is the role of field trip and study trip in your work. And the third one is I'm quite curious on. You are very attentive on all the projects, very attentive work on the definition between public, semi-private, and private space. And I would like to have more information about this in the King's Cross situation, where officially the space is private, it's not public.
Yes, officially.
And no one tells this. So, can you, but because of course I started actually a contradiction in this fighting between public and private and private space.
Yep.
And I think we can learn from England the experience on how we can define the differences, but at the same time, I have the impression that in England more and more there is an invasion of private instead of...
Well, that's true. I mean, I think if you take the King's Cross question first, fortunately, the developer who took on the whole site, the whole thing, they were really interested in public space, and I mean that genuinely. They were interested in community, they're quite left-wing in their politics and so on. But to be realistic, they had to make a private development. And what they did in the end was they learnt from previous developments, the thing you should design first is the public realm, and then the buildings become the backdrop to the public realm, and that, for them, meant the buildings were not so extravagant, not so expensive, quite a nice thing to do for the city, and the public spaces were designed well. Now, I think it's been successful, and I think it shows that the public spaces are good, but public, yes, they're actually private spaces. In the hands of a different developer, there would be gates at night, and there might be a security guard, and so on. And that's horrible. And we have one other development, I showed you another, I showed you only a few projects. We have a development of 5 buildings around a square in the City of London, which does have security guards, and you're not allowed to take pictures. And we protested about it. It says not right. You could walk through it, that's fair enough, but they want to assert their right to be private, and I think that's wrong. So we argue about these things a lot. King's Cross is a good example. There are many others which are not so good. But Britain has a kind of obsession with private capital at the moment, and the public domain, the public purse, if you like, is neglected. It's just the particular times we live in, I think.
The other interesting thing at King's Cross was they not only believed that the public space should be of quality, they actually built a lot of the public space well before they built the buildings. And so people could actually walk into the site from the south and walk to the north and then back out again. Basically, it got embedded into the locality by putting in pedestrian routes, and the pedestrian routes did actually have green space, they had playground areas, they even had a natural water swimming pool, which has been moved around. They had what was called the skip garden, and skip is, you know, what you put building rubble in. They had a whole garden which was made of a series of skips, and they literally just relocated that by lorry every so often. So they really actually bedded it in before building a lot of the buildings. And so the buildings are almost filling the spaces that have been left between public realm.
So, now Edinburgh College of Art, just to get back to that one. When we were students, there were 2 schools of architecture in Edinburgh. Now there's only one, they joined together, but in those days there were 2. One was the university school, which was had a slightly higher reputation, was a little academic, and it was good on theory, and maybe the Rome Scholar would come from that school. The Edinburgh College of Art School, which was an art school, had an architecture department which was linked to a technical university, and that's where we were. But the thing that we were fascinated by was what happened in the art school. So we had friends who were making silversmiths, for example, tapestry weavers and painters, and we had workshops we could use, and we thought that was fantastic. But there were, in a year of 40 or 50 architecture students, there was only 2 or 3 of us who were interested in that side. So when we finally became architects and we went to London, got jobs, we were keen to work with artists, and particularly tapestry weavers initially, and other people, to try to integrate that with the design of buildings. So looking back, I think we didn't miss the more academic side of Edinburgh University, and we gained a lot from the practical experience of being in an art school.
There's a lovely story, because I applied to both schools and I was accepted by both.
I wasn't.
And there was an interview for both, and the Edinburgh College of Art, you were summoned in for a day, and in the morning you would be plucked out for an interview at some point with a portfolio. But in the morning you had to prepare some drawings, and the one I had to do was you actually had to draw from memory an old-fashioned deck chair in sufficient detail that somebody who had never seen a deck chair could build it or make it. And the other option, I think, the other days they got umbrellas. And in the afternoon, you were told to come up with 50 uses for a brick. And then when I went to Edinburgh University, it was a psychometric test that they were doing in conjunction with the psychology department. So I chose the art college. But the other thing that you raised is...
You'll get your chance.
No, but you were talking about field trips, study trips, etc. Those, when we were students, those didn't really happen. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So there has actually, even in the last week, there's been a pushback in the UK from architecture students, because now they have to pay a lot of money for fees. And we've looked on, we've had first year out students, and they're saying, oh, I've got to save up. Why have you got to save up? Oh, I'm going to such and such a school, and our field trip is to Brasilia. I think, Brasilia? They've probably never been to Manchester, but they're going. And actually, the students have pushed back and said, this is crazy.
Too expensive.
It's far, far too expensive. Actually, we need to learn, but we need to learn in a way of actually simply going to visit different places. And for that, as you say, Erasmus is different. That's fantastic, because you do get that cross-fertilization of ideas. And we do that in the practice. We have many different nationalities. And that's one of yet another part of the despondency of Brexit, that we may not be able to work with and collaborate with really talented people from many different countries. That is a real problem.
No, yeah. Marina, you've been jumping up and down. Go on. Yes, they are now. Well, I think it goes... Well, I think it depends on the type of architect you are. I mean, we met as students and we got married when we were still at college, and we liked working together. So even when we were in our college years, 4th and final year, we were doing group projects with friends, and we actually enjoyed that a great deal. So when we finally got the chance to start an architectural practice, it was absolutely not about one or two individuals designing everything and the office executing the projects. That we didn't know how to do that, but we also didn't want to do it. So we ended up with a much more collaborative system with people who are sharing the ideas equally, and what we might do is chair a discussion or do some sketches to encourage people to join in. So by the time, well, we had 10 years, no, we had 10 years working for other people before we felt we had enough experience to start a practice.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the
But we
practice-
never intended having our own practice. That was the other thing. It made sense at one point, 9 years in, to think about doing it.
And I was getting fed up with my job, so I thought we'd try it. So we said, well, do you think we should work together again? And the idea was, well, yeah, okay, let's see if it works. And of course it did. So what we found after a number of years in practice, we had a series of buildings which you could not say were entirely the product of just two people. And it was not fair. It was 10 or it was 14 people or something like that. Now we're 80 strong. And there are people who've been working with us since 1992, which is only just after the practice started. So when we had to face this issue about what happens if we retire, or what happens if we get run over by the Rome trolley bus or something, what happens to the company? And there were several examples in London of companies where the original partners were selling to a big, powerful commercial firm. They would make a lot of money, they would disappear, the new current firm would come in and destroy everything that was there, and everybody hated. So we were thinking there must be a better way, and we looked over a period of several years at employee ownership. So the people in the office could have the ownership of the firm, and we were just employees again. So that's what we've done. We've sold our shares. There were two other guys who had shares as well. We sold 100% of the shares to a trust owned by the employees. And they all get a bonus. If there's a good year, you get a bonus. You can't go and sell your piece of the company to someone else. That's against the rules. But it means it cannot be sold to some big corporation somewhere. And so the people who've worked with us for a long time, they have nothing to fear. They can dictate the future. So if you take the examples we've shown, the Chester Theatre is done by the younger generation. It wasn't done by us. It was one of our co-directors from 1992 who led the project. He met the Queen, not us.
And that's right. And if you go back to Alison, the project architect for Chancery Lane, Alison worked with us for her first year out, between her BA and then her master's degree. And it was during that period that we actually did the first feasibility study for Chancery Lane. And for a variety of reasons, it didn't go ahead. But she came and she rejoined us a year after she graduated from her master's, and she worked on some very big projects. And then when Chancery Lane came back in, we thought it was appropriate for her to be the project architect. And so she saw that all the way through. And as Rab said, she had her first son at the end of that project, came back. She's now got a 2-month-old second son. But she was one of the first people to be selected to be an employee trustee for the trust, because the discipline is quite interesting. That running a company rather than running a practice, but running a company, the management tend to know what's going on, and so things happen quite quickly and to a certain extent almost in an ad hoc way. But actually, we now have to report to the owners, and the owners are represented by a board of trustees, and they're not elected. We consulted with all the employees when we were proposing to do it, and they were then involved in drawing up the rules that were to be adopted. And they well, but it makes sense. We are a community. Therefore, you were in dialogue with it.
Well,
yes.
we had
Yes.
a few.
Yeah.
We let it be known that we had done this, and it was reported in the press a couple of times. AHMM have now done it partly, but what happens?
Yeah.
What happened first was we had 2 or 3 other architects who came to visit us to say, "How did you do it? We're thinking of doing the same ourselves." And there were 2 of these architects. You would have to say they completely wouldn't suit it. They were far too egotistical. They thought it was all their own work. They still wanted to take home huge amounts of money compared with everybody else. And I'm thinking, why are they even investigating it? It's not suitable. Temperamentally, it's not suitable. In some of the firms, AHMM are one, where they've sold half, not the whole thing.
60%.
60%. And so they can do another sale later on if they wish, but it's, there are different ways of doing it. And we found, a big one?
No?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Is it Make? When Ken Shuttleworth left Fulster and set up Make, they started as an employee-owned. But I had a meeting with them a couple of months ago, because there is a network where we do get together to discuss it. And I said, well, how many trustees do you have? And they went, oh, we've got 2. And I said, well, who are they? And this director said, oh, it's Ken and me. So, yeah, there's nuances. But ORMS have just become employee-owned as well. Yeah.
But, you know, I referred a little bit earlier to a kind of, I would call it a kind of extreme capitalism which has taken over Britain, which you can probably tell we don't much care for it. We're not extreme left either, but I think there's a kind of generosity of spirit because people have stayed for a long time, and it's only fair that people have a share in that because they have helped to create a firm with all these awards you mentioned. It's their work as much as ours. Well, it's a better model in many ways. You see, if you go through architecture school believing you're going to be the next Zaha Hadid, you're going to be completely supreme and you're going to design everything and other people will do the work. That's one model, and a few architects are good enough to do that. But most architects are not good enough to do that. They need the collaboration, they need the other ideas coming from other people, and the smart thing is to recognize as an editor how to get them to assemble in one coherent building.
There's another much bigger topic that I'll allude to, but we won't go into detail, because Rab talked about collaboration. And we're very clear, we're architects, but we are actually part of the construction industry. And the reason we're architects is we like building buildings. We don't want to just have lots of unrealized projects. So that collaboration means that we have to work not only with other consultants and clients, but we actually are working with constructors, whether they are contractors, whether subcontractors, specialist designers. And so that whole notion that we are actually part of something much bigger, and that we've got a key part to play, but actually we've got to realize that we have to balance our knowledge with other people's knowledge, and other people have greater knowledge in certain respects. So that again informs that notion of just being able to engage and to actually, it's a horrible cliche that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, but that's what it's about. And that's why practice is very important, to be able to listen to people and to give them the wherewithal to articulate. Because we've got graduates coming in, they know much more about certain topics than we do. And I don't mean computer programs.
Well, it's enjoyable. We do it because we enjoy it. If it didn't work, we wouldn't do it.
Maybe it's because we're Scottish.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah.